follows the trial of 9 men, all of Pakistani or Afghan origin, who were jailed for child sex offences in May. Let's get more on this story now. We can speak to Ajmal Masroor, an imam himself and also commentator in our central London studio, along with Douglas Murray from the Centre for Social Cohesion. Thank you, gentlemen, both for joining us this afternoon. First of all, Mr. Masroor, this is a damning report about the state of affairs within the wider community of Rochdale, isn't it?
Indeed it is, and I think we need to be very vigilant and we need to do something about it. I've been saying it for years, that our overall attitude towards sex has become rather rotten. Our kids are being over-sexualized too early. There are pedophiles in our communities. There are rings that are running sex grooming programs, perhaps in different parts of the country. Some of them come from particular ethnic backgrounds. Those are disgusting criminals and they need to be locked up. In fact, their prison sentence, as far as I was concerned, wasn't long enough.
Douglas Murray, it seems to be a clash of the, perhaps, elements of the pop culture and the criminal fraternity.
Well, that's certainly the case, but the very shocking report that's come out today shows really an even further problem, which was a systemic failure of the authorities to deal with this case, as your report said, to even take the girls seriously when they were making extremely serious accusations. It is damning, and I think it's one of those stories which, I mean, it's bleak from beginning to end. A whole set of young lives have been ruined in this episode, and I think it's just to be hoped by absolutely everybody that the right lessons are taken from it.
Ajmal Masroor, much has been made of the ethnic origin of the men in this gang. It's not the first time there have been child grooming operations in this country, so it's not necessarily a solo, unique story. Nevertheless, is there an ethnic element to this that we need to look at?
I don't think the whole community is responsible for the criminality of a bunch of thugs, criminals, twisted mindset. I think those are the ones we need to isolate and ensure that they never do it again. But we do have a problem, and that is within the Asian communities, sex as a topic isn't talked about, isn't discussed at home. Parents don't take much interest because they feel embarrassed perhaps, or constrained by their culture. That needs to be addressed head on, I believe. It needs to be discussed more openly, more robustly and frankly. And in schools, our education system needs to deal with it properly. And secondly, I think sex and attitude towards sex overall in the society needs to be dealt with. But Asian community as a whole, we can't blame everybody for criminality of a few, but we need to make sure that it never happens again.
Douglas Murray, do you think it's difficult for some families living within a new community like the one here in the UK when they're surrounded by the kind of over-sexualised pop culture that many people accuse us of having? Do you think it's difficult for them to settle into that?
I'm not sure that's at all the cause in this particular case. I think we have to be extremely careful about this. First of all, it's extremely important that people realise that this is not a phenomenon of one community. People from any racial or religious background can end up doing the most appalling things to anybody of any other racial or ethnic or religious background. So it's important to bear that in mind to start with. But it's also the case that it came out at the trial, and the judge mentioned it in this case, that there was an element of the fact that the girls who were the victims of this abuse were from a different community and were therefore seen to be easier or more appropriate victims. Now, I think there's, as I said earlier, a lot of things that need to be taken from this. One is, and I think that the report that came out today shows this, one is that the authorities have to not be fearful of tackling things which look like they could have a racial or even religious element. And secondly, of course, it's very important that members of communities, as Ajmal just mentioned, deal with this themselves. I think it can't be stressed enough that it's always the case with any community that they don't want what is often seen to be dirty linen being washed in public. Very often there is a great concern, and this goes across all racial and ethnic communities. Very often there is a concern that reporting something will, as it were, be giving evidence to detractors or something like this. So this is actually a mindset that has to be changed on all and every side. Okay, there has to be a mindset change at the police and the authorities end, and also at the community end.
I want to give Ajmal Masroor a chance to respond to a couple of those points there.
I think I agree with most of the things what Douglas has just mentioned. More importantly, I would like to say, I mean, I, for example, have been running programs across the country about attitude to marriage, attitude to relationship, especially opposite sex. There is an unhealthy understanding among some communities, and that needs to be dealt with. Over-sexualized culture in our community at large needs to be dealt with. And I want to emphasize the point that was made earlier on. This is a problem, a plague that covers all communities. Singling out one would not solve the problem. But if there is one, we should not be shy and afraid of calling a spade a spade. It's wrong, it's criminal, and no culture should ever endorse such criminal behavior.
Ajmal Masroor and Douglas Murray. Gentlemen, thank you both for joining us this afternoon on Sky News.